The Nobel Prize-winning ethologist Nicholas Tinbergen wrote a very influential paper in 1963 that tried to outline the kinds of questions that ethologists could possibly ask regarding the study of animal behavior. And he didn't mean for these to be necessarily mutually exclusive, because they're not, as we'll see. But they are a convenient way of helping people think clearly about what it is they're studying and why they're choosing to study what it is they're choosing to study. So that paper is called On Aims and Methods of Ethology, that was published in Zeitschrift für Tierpsychologie, a journal that no longer exists in its German form, even though most of the papers published in it were in fact in English, but rather I think it's just called now Journal of Ethology, published in Germany. Well, the first of the four questions are questions concerning causation, by which we mean mechanisms of behavior. What causes an animal to behave the way it is behaving at any particular point in time? So take, for example, mobbing behavior by small birds that typically mob larger organisms. By the way, they don't always have to be other birds, as we'll be seeing in a later segment. They can even be mammals. But we typically see this kind of thing happening when a larger bird has settled on or near a smaller bird's territory. And so these smaller birds are actively trying to drive off what they view as some kind of a threat. And we call that mobbing. So obviously what would cause them to do this is, guess what? The presence of a large bird, in this case, a bald eagle, on their territory, on or near their territory. Sometimes it's just one small bird mobbing a larger one. And in this case, you can see it's a number of birds that are mobbing this bald eagle, which, by the way, happens to be minding its own business. It's just being harassed constantly. This has to be incredibly annoying for the large bird. But again, what they're trying to do is drive it away from their territory. And you can see that these larger birds will put up with quite a lot before they're going to move. Just watch this for a little while, not super long. Just to show you how persistent the large bird can be. And equally persistent the small ones, who just continue to mob it until it goes away. It kind of looks like a scene from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, but no, it's not. You can hear another eagle, by the way, off in the distance. And finally, this guy's had enough. Go find another place to perch. So what causes mobbing? Well, in this case, the obvious causative stimulus would be the presence of the larger bird. So you can ask questions about causation. And you can ask questions about function, or what Tinbergen called survival value. In other words, what's the result of a behavior? What's the outcome of behaving in a particular way? Such as these owls that have perched where they've decided to perch. Obviously, it's to keep themselves concealed, a form of camouflage. That would be the function of sitting where they're sitting, as opposed to sitting in some open location. You can also ask questions about evolution, phylogeny, phylogenetic questions, evolutionary questions. And just to give you one of so many possible examples here, because we're going to be looking at evolution as a separate topic in another segment, in many other segments actually, looking at bird song, bird vocalizations. So if we look at the vocal organ of birds, it's called the syrinx, and you can see that it is this area where the trachea branches off into the two bronchi that end up going to either lung. And so this is where the set of membranes is located that actually produces sounds as air passes through them and they vibrate. as you can see here, this is a syrinx of a duck embryo, and the embryo is actually undergoing surgery, so it is actually quite alive. And air is being passed out of the embryo, and because embryos do vocalize, by the way, in the later stages of incubation. And so what's going on here is these membranes are being drawn into the what we call the bronchial lumen, the inner cavity, so that as air is passing over them, it hits the membranes, causing them to vibrate and produce bird vocalizations. Now, the thing is, not all syringes, which is the plural of syrinx, not all syringes actually look exactly like that. They vary from species to species. So with that in mind, there was one investigator that decided to try to trace the evolutionary relationships of a group of birds called flycatchers, and this is just a subsample of the many species of flycatchers. And he chose to look at 8 different species in terms of how their syringes actually compared with one another. So he based an evolutionary relationship just on the anatomical structure of their syringes, the vocal producing organs in birds. You can also ask questions about development, ontogenetic questions, ontogeny. So, for example, if I was interested in studying prey recognition, I'd want to know something about the early experiences of, in this case, we're looking at a roadrunner. That's what kind of bird that is, a roadrunner. The kinds of early experiences that contribute to choosing the kinds of prey that it ends up eating as an adult, how it manages to catch that prey, how it manages to handle the prey once it's caught it. There's all kinds of developmental questions that are very interesting that can be asked here regarding, in this case, prey recognition. We could look at anything, species recognition, individual recognition, any developmental topic. All behaviors actually develop. So with that in mind, I started thinking about this one day, and I decided that, one could really reorganize Tinbergen's scheme in a different way. And there are all possible combinations by which you could do this. So I'm kind of biased because I kind of think that developmental questions are particularly important in understanding any kind of behavior. So, as we look at these 3 questions of Tinbergen, causation, function, and phylogeny, you really cannot divorce ontogenetic questions from any of them. Ontogeny plays a role in each of these things. It's really, I guess, just a matter of emphasis in terms of the kind of questions that a person is asking, how they're going about answering those questions, and the kind of conclusions and generalizations that they might draw from whatever data they've collected. So this is my own bias. You could also say you can't divorce phylogeny from any of these other ones. And of course you can't, because everything evolves. So, you could reorganize this every which way. This is just my kind of bias. But in any event, these questions are still very helpful in terms of keeping track of exactly what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and the kinds of conclusions that you can draw from whatever data you've collected.